The first thing I saw when I pulled into the driveway was my wedding photo sitting face up in a puddle next to the trash cans. The glass was cracked right across Loretta's face, her smile split in two by a single diagonal line. I sat behind the wheel with the engine still running and just looked at it. That's when I knew this wasn't any kind of accident. My name is Virgil Hargrove. I'm 58 years old, semi-retired electrician, Boise, Idaho. I've been doing trade work since I was 28, crawling through walls, climbing attics, fixing what other people gave up on. I raised my son after his mother passed. I paid my bills, I kept my word. That's about the whole of who I am. 3 days earlier, I'd driven up to Lucky Peak for a fishing trip. Same spot I'd been going to since Loretta was alive. 3 days of no phone, no news, just the water, and whatever I managed to catch, I needed it. I always need it after a long stretch of work. I came back on a Friday afternoon in early May, tired but good, money in my pocket from the last job. Looking forward to a quiet weekend. Then I saw the pile. It started with the photo, but once I turned off the engine and actually looked, it was everywhere. My belongings were stacked and scattered along the sidewalk next to the dumpster, like someone had emptied an entire house onto the street, which, as it turned out, is exactly what they'd done. I got out of the truck slowly. I didn't run. I didn't start yelling. I walked over and started going through it the way you'd assess damage after a bad storm, methodical, taking inventory. My work shirts, the ones I'd worn to job sites for over 20 years, oil stains and all, were crumpled on the ground like rags someone had wiped their hands on. My tackle boxes were split open, lures and sinkers mixed in with kitchen utensils and old bank statements. The fishing rod I'd owned since my early 40s was snapped clean in half, its guides torn away, sitting on top of a cardboard box like it meant nothing. I picked up the wedding photo from the puddle, water dripped off the frame and ran between my knuckles. I set it carefully on the hood of my truck. Then I found the watch. The anniversary watch Loretta had saved up 3 months to buy me because we couldn't afford anything fancy back then. It was face down in the dirt near the edge of the pile. I turned it over. Crystal shattered. The hands were frozen at 217. I held it for a second, then set it next to the photo. Loretta's jewelry box was half buried under a tangle of my winter coats. The velvet lining had come loose. Her mother's ring, the one she'd always planned to pass down someday, was sitting in the dirt next to a bottle cap and a cigarette butt. I picked it up and cleaned it off on my shirt. I already had a pretty clear picture of what was going on before I even tried the front door, but I tried it anyway. The key went in halfway and stopped dead. I pulled it out, looked at it, tried again. Same result. Different lock. Same keyhole, different lock. They'd changed it while I was gone. I knocked. Nothing. I called Clarence's cell, 3 rings, then voicemail. His recorded voice, cheerful and completely unbothered. "You've reached Clarence. Leave a message." "Clarence, it's Dad. I just got back from Lucky Peak and everything I own is sitting on the sidewalk. The locks are changed. Call me back right now." I called Nadine's number. Straight to voicemail without ringing. Didn't bother leaving a message. I stood on my own front porch for a moment, looking at the door. 7 years I'd lived in that house. 7 years of mortgage payments, groceries, utility bills, repairs. I'd rewired the kitchen myself when the panels started tripping. I'd replumbed the bathroom when a pipe cracked mid-winter. I knew every wall in that house the way an electrician knows the work he did with his own hands. I walked next door to Harold Pruitt's place. Harold is 67, retired postal worker, spends most of his day in the front room watching the neighborhood, the way some people watch TV. He knows what time everyone leaves for work, which neighbors get packages, when the Hendersons started parking that second car on the street. If anything happened on this block, Harold saw it. He opened the door about 8 inches and looked at me with an expression I recognized immediately. It was the look of a man who knew exactly what had happened and had already decided he wasn't going to say so. "Harold, you see what's going on over there? All my stuff's on the street and my key doesn't work." He glanced past me toward the pile, then back at me. "Been working in the backyard most of the day, Virgil. Didn't really notice anything. Harold's back has been bad for 3 years. He doesn't do yard work anymore. He told me himself last summer when I offered to help him trim the hedge along our property line." "All right," I said. "Thanks anyway." He nodded quickly. Relieved I wasn't going to push it, and closed the door. I went back to the pile. I found my old aluminum lawn chair in the mix, bent frame, still functional, and I set it up on the sidewalk next to my own belongings and sat down, and I waited. The street went quiet as dinner time came and went. Lights came on in other houses. Garage doors opened, cars pulled in, normal Friday evening. Nobody came out to ask if I needed anything. The whole block had the careful stillness of people who'd been told to mind their own business, or had decided to on their own. My phone had nothing new on it. Just the bait shop receipt from earlier that week. I sat there for 4 hours. Their headlights swept across the pile at 7:04 p.m. I know the exact time because I checked my phone the second I heard the car turn into the driveway. Nadine was driving. She always drove. They got out and walked toward the front door like I wasn't there. Then she saw me stand up from the lawn chair and she stopped. "Virgil," she said, "my name the way you'd say the name of something you'd been hoping wouldn't show up. You want to tell me what's going on?" I kept my voice level. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. She set her grocery bags down on the porch step, crossed her arms. And then she said it clean, rehearsed, no hesitation. "We don't need you anymore. The mortgage is paid off. Your job here is done. Take your stuff and go live at the dump for all I care." I looked at Clarence, my son, 36 years old. I taught him to ride a bike in a parking lot off Emerald Street when he was 6. I helped him through college, 2 semesters of which I paid for out of pocket when his financial aid got delayed. I co-signed the mortgage on this house because he couldn't qualify a loan. His credit wasn't there yet. Mine was. He was staring at the ground with his hands in his pockets like a kid who'd broken a window and was waiting for someone else to explain it. Clarence, I put enough weight on his name that he had to look up. "This is my house. My name is on the deed. You want to explain to me what she just said?" He met my eyes for maybe 2 seconds. "Dad, Nadine and I need our own space. You're always here. It's time for us to have our own life. Our own space," I said. He nodded at the ground again. I looked back at Nadine. She was watching me with the kind of patience that meant she'd already won something in her head and was just waiting for me to figure it out. "You should have looked at the deed before you changed the locks," I said. She smiled. "Good night, Virgil." They went inside. The porch light came on, then immediately went off. I stood there in the dark for a moment, then turned back to the pile and got to work. I want to be clear about something because it matters to the rest of this story. The first couple of years after I moved in, things were genuinely good. Clarence was 29 when I co-signed. Nadine was 27. They were new to the house, new to each other's habits, still figuring out what they wanted their life to look like. I gave them space. I paid my share, more than my share honestly, and I stayed out of their way. We had dinners together on Sundays. Clarence would ask me about work, about the jobs I was running, about electrical problems he'd noticed in the house. Nadine would show me whatever she was redecorating. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It felt like family. Loretta had been gone 2 years by the time I moved in. The house I'd shared with her for 30 years felt too large and too quiet in a way that had nothing to do with the square footage. When Clarence called about the mortgage situation, I didn't hesitate. Not because I felt obligated, because I wanted to be somewhere that felt like people again. That part I made a decision about, I own it. But somewhere around year 3, things started shifting. The Sunday dinners got shorter. Clarence stopped asking for my opinion on things and started just telling me how decisions had already been made. Small stuff at first, which cable service to use, what to do about the backyard, then bigger stuff. I stopped being consulted and started being informed after the fact. By year 5, Nadine would sigh audibly if I was in the kitchen when she came in. Not say anything, just sigh. Like my being there was a minor inconvenience she'd learned to manage. Clarence would look at his phone during the rare meals we still shared. I started eating earlier alone in my room without really deciding that's what I was doing. It just became the path of least resistance. By year 7, I was a bill-paying ghost in a house that had quietly stopped being mine in any way that mattered except legally. That part, as it turned out, was the only part that counted. I told myself it was temporary, stress at Clarence's job, a rough patch, what families go through. Looking back, I was just making excuses because the alternative was admitting I'd given everything I had to people who'd been waiting for me to finish being useful. The budget in, off the highway, was $52 for the night. The carpet had the worn-down look of 20 years of passing through. The heater rattled when it kicked on. The bathroom was barely big enough to turn around in. I carried my boxes in one at a time. My back didn't love it, but I didn't rush. I set Loretta's jewelry box and the cracked wedding photo on the nightstand, made a small amount of order out of what I'd managed to salvage. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and went through the papers. I'd grabbed everything from the pile that looked official: insurance policies, bank records, tax returns, mortgage documents. All of it had been thrown out with the rest of my things with the same care someone gives to junk mail. That was their first real mistake. I spread the papers across the bedspread and started sorting. I wasn't in a hurry. I'm an electrician. I've spent 30 years tracing problems back to their source before I touch anything. You don't start pulling wire until you know exactly where the fault is. By midnight, I had a clear picture of where I stood. By 6 a.m., I was dressed and ready to move. Rupert Langford's name was in the phone directory under Property and Estate Law, with a note that said weekend consultations were available for urgent matters. I called at 8 a.m. Saturday. He picked up himself. I told him I needed an hour of his time and I had paperwork. He told me to come in at 9. His office was on the 3rd floor of a brick building near the Capitol, the kind of place that's been there long enough to feel solid. He was in his mid-40s, calm, no small talk. He accepted the folder I brought and read everything the way I respect. Slowly, without reacting to any of it until he'd seen the whole picture. When he got to the deed and the original mortgage agreement, he stopped, read that section twice. Then he turned the deed around and set it on the desk, facing me, his finger on the relevant line. Mr. Hargrove, you are the sole owner of this property. Your name only. Your son and daughter-in-law are not on the deed, not listed as co-borrowers, and there is no lease agreement of any kind in these documents. Legally, they are unauthorized occupants. You have been for the past 7 years. I looked at my name on that line for a moment. What are my options? You can demand they vacate immediately. You can begin formal eviction proceedings. Or you can sell as the legal owner. That is entirely your right. They have no grounds to prevent or delay a sale. The mortgage is fully paid, satisfied as of last month. You own it free and clear. Current market value in that neighborhood runs around $340,000. I thanked him, paid the consultation fee, and left with certified copies of everything. I sat in my truck in the parking lot for a few minutes, not because I was upset. I just wanted to think clearly before the next step. $340,000. I had been living like a man surviving on someone else's charity in a house I owned outright for 7 years, paying their groceries, covering their utilities, fixing every broken thing with my own hands. Then I remembered the email. I'd almost missed it when I was sorting through the papers the night before. It was folded inside a manila envelope that had been thrown out with the mortgage records, probably grabbed by accident when Nadine was packing my things. Or maybe she just didn't think it mattered anymore. It was a printed email, Nadine's address at the top. The header showed a realty company on the north side of Boise, not Beverly Caldwell's office, a different one. The date was 2 weeks before my fishing trip. The subject line read, Inquiry, Listing Process, and Ownership Transfer. I read it twice in the motel the night before, then a third time just to make sure I was understanding it correctly. She had written asking about the process for listing a property, and her exact words, transferring ownership to the current residents prior to or concurrent with a sale. She wanted to know what documentation would be needed, what the timeline typically looked like, and whether it was possible to initiate the process without the involvement of all parties on the original mortgage. Without the involvement of all parties, she had been planning to sell my house while I was still paying for it, while I was still living in it. She just needed me out of the picture first, which is exactly what the fishing trip gave her. A clean window, 3 days to pack my things and change the locks before I came back. The eviction wasn't something that happened because I became inconvenient. It was the final step in a plan she'd been working out for weeks. I sat with that for a long time. I'm not a man who gets loud when he's angry. Never have been. Loretta used to say the quieter I got, the more serious the situation was. She wasn't wrong. By the time I put that email back in the folder Saturday morning, I was very quiet indeed. Beverly Caldwell's office was open by appointment on Saturdays. She was sharp, direct, and didn't ask me a single unnecessary question about why I wanted to move fast. She pulled up comparable sales in the neighborhood, walked me through the numbers, and gave me a realistic figure. $340,000 for a 4-bedroom in good condition. Solid demand, good location, right kind of inventory level for a quick sale. Photography Monday morning, she said, listed on the MLS by Tuesday. In this market, expect serious interest within the first week. I'll be out of town, I said. You have my full authorization to proceed with showings and to accept any reasonable offer at or above our floor price. She didn't blink. Understood. I'll keep you updated by text. I signed the listing agreement, shook her hand, and left. By 4 p.m., I had a month-to-month apartment downtown, 1 bedroom, furnished, cash deposit. Enough space for what I'd salvaged. I moved my essentials in, set Loretta's photo on the windowsill, and hung my tool belt on the back of the door. That evening, I booked a flight to Cancun leaving Sunday morning. I picked it because it was warm and far, and no one who knew me would think to look there. I packed 1 carry-on bag. I turned my phone off before I went to sleep. Sunday, I was on the plane. The resort wasn't fancy. Clean room, decent food, a balcony that looked out over water that had no interest in what was happening back in Boise. First night, I sat out there with a cold beer and watched the sun go down until the sky went completely dark. I slept 9 hours without waking up once. I hadn't done that in years. I turned my phone on briefly on Tuesday afternoon, just long enough to check that Beverly's listing had gone live. It had. Good photos, accurate description, price point right where we'd discussed. I scrolled past it and saw the missed calls already stacking up. 31 of them, and it was only day 3. I turned the phone back off and ordered lunch by the pool. By the time I turned it on again Wednesday morning, 9 days after I'd left, the number had climbed to 76 missed calls, 43 voicemails, texts from numbers I recognized and a few I didn't. Probably neighbors Clarence had started calling when he ran out of other options. I sat on the balcony and listened to the voicemails in order. The first ones were from Clarence Monday afternoon, his voice tight, controlled, trying to sound like a man in charge of a situation he wasn't in charge of. Dad, there are people in the house taking photographs. Call me back immediately. I don't know what you think you're doing, but this needs to stop. Nadine's first message was colder. Virgil, I don't know what game this is, but you need to call us today. By Monday evening, the tone had already started shifting. Clarence again. Dad, the realtor says she's acting on your authorization. She showed us paperwork. We've been calling your cell, calling the motel you were at, calling Harold next door. Where are you? Tuesday morning, Clarence's voice had lost its edge and picked up something else. Something I hadn't heard from him in a long time. Dad, please? We went to your fishing spot. We drove up to Lucky Peak and asked around. Nobody's seen you since last week. We don't know if you're okay. Can you call and let us know you're all right? Beverly had sent 4 text updates, each one more straightforward than the last. A showing Tuesday morning went well. A young couple, Chester and Claudette Paulson, had come back for a second look Tuesday afternoon and made an offer. Full asking price, they had financing ready and wanted to close fast. Her last message read, recommend accepting. Strong buyers, clean offer, quick close. Your call? I texted back 2 words. Accept it, then I booked a return flight for Wednesday evening. Finished my coffee and packed my 1 carry-on bag. The taxi pulled into my apartment complex just after 9 p.m. Wednesday. I had a tan and considerably less patience for nonsense than I'd had 9 days earlier. I was pulling my bag from the trunk when I heard them. Clarence and Nadine were standing at the edge of the parking lot under one of the overhead lights. They looked like people who hadn't slept in a week, which based on the voicemails was probably accurate. Clarence had lost weight. Nadine's usual put-together appearance was completely gone, no composure, no edge. Just a woman standing in a parking lot at 9 p.m. who had run out of moves. Virgil. Her voice came out quieter than I'd ever heard it. Nadine, Clarence stepped forward. He looked younger somehow, the way people look when the thing propping them up gets taken away and they're left standing on their own. Dad, we've been looking everywhere. We called your old crew, the fishing club, Loretta's sister in Twin Falls. Nobody knew where you were. We were worried. I heard 76 calls is hard to miss. Please, he closed some of the distance between us. Don't go through with the sale, we'll pay rent. We'll pay whatever the new owners want. We can fix this, just tell us what you need. I looked at him for a long moment. This was my son. The same kid who used to fall asleep on the couch watching ball games, and I'd drape a blanket over him without waking him up. I wasn't going to pretend that didn't mean anything to me. Clarence, I said, I found the email. He went still. What email? The one Nadine printed out. The inquiry to the realty company on the north side. The one asking about listing the property and transferring ownership and whether it could be done without the involvement of all parties on the mortgage. I watched him turn to Nadine slowly. She was looking at the ground. That was 2 weeks before you changed the locks, I said. While I was still making payments, she wasn't reacting to anything, Clarence. She'd been planning it. He didn't say anything for a long time. The parking lot was quiet, except for distant highway noise and the hum of the overhead light. I didn't know about the email, he said finally. His voice was flat. I know you didn't. Dad, the sale closes tomorrow, I said. Chester and Claudette Paulson. Young couple. They've got a little one and another on the way. They're going to take good care of it. I picked up my bag. You've got until tomorrow morning to finish getting your things out. Where are you going to go? Clarence asked. That's not something you need to worry about anymore. I walked to the elevator. He called after me once, just my name, nothing attached to it, no ask, no argument. Just Dad in a voice that had run out of everything else. I didn't stop. Thursday morning, I signed the final transfer documents at the title office. The Paulsons were already there when I arrived, Chester in a collared shirt, Claudette with their toddler on her hip, both of them with the nervous energy of people on the edge of something they'd worked toward for a long time. Chester shook my hand on the way out. Firm grip, direct eye contact. Thank you for making this happen so quickly. Take care of it, I said. We will, he said, and I believed him. I closed on a cabin outside Ketchum, Idaho the following week. 2 bedrooms, a covered porch, close enough to good water that I could walk to it in the morning with a cup of coffee and a rod and not need anything else for a few hours. I paid cash, no mortgage, no co-signers, no arrangements with anyone. I put Loretta's jewelry box on the bedroom dresser and the wedding photo, cracked glass and all, on the mantel above the fireplace. Hung my tool belt on a hook by the back door. First evening, I sat out on the porch as the light went down over the hills and just listened. Wind in the trees, water somewhere below, nothing that needed fixing, nobody expecting anything. I thought about Clarence once, wondered whether he'd eventually work out the full shape of what happened, not just what I did, but the choice he made when he stood in that driveway and said nothing. That's the thing a man has to reckon with on his own timetable. I couldn't do it for him. I hoped he would. But that was his work now, not mine. I'd spent 7 years trying to hold on to something that had already let me go. Paid for it, maintained it, showed up for it every single day. Took me getting thrown out to understand that belonging somewhere has nothing to do with who's willing to keep you around. It has everything to do with whose name is on the deed. Mine is on this one. That's enough.